Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book World Without End by Ken Follett. This is the sequel in the Kingsbridge series to the monumental book Pillars of the Earth. This is one of the most famous and most lauded books of historical fiction ever. I have a full review on the channel where I talk about it, spoiler-free, where I talk about my thoughts on the book. And so you can find that if you're interested in on my thoughts on Pillars. And I say that because my thoughts on Pillars are going to be largely the same thoughts I have for World Without End, because they're such similarly built books. First of all, they're both beefy 1,000-page books, and yet I read each of them in 3 days each. This one about 2 months ago, this one just now. And I was very surprised that Follett was able to recapture the magic in this way. Part of it is because he followed a lot of the same ideas that Pillars of the Earth had, but also just because his writing style is just so enrapturous, and I have to just keep reading everything that he's writing on the page. You know, I would sit there for hours and just keep reading and reading, and hundreds of pages have gone by, and it feels like I just started reading a chapter. And so that's the thing about Follett's world is he's just so intriguing, and this is in some ways exactly what I've been interested in, which is kind of that medieval times historical fiction that feels like an epic fantasy. This is like if epic fantasy without the magic. And you know what? To me, I love that because I don't really care about magic systems that much, despite the fact that I'm a huge epic fantasy fan, but I love the kind of medieval settings. I love the way that characters are written in fantasy books, and so it's nice to be able to basically find an epic fantasy without the magic, and that's basically what this is. The characters are still strong, but I think that the characters in Follett's first book are going to carry with me a little bit longer. For example, in Pillars of the Earth, you have Prior Philip, who is the best character in the book, and he's an amazing character. And sadly, there is no real comparative character here that matches that. Maybe Wulfric. But Wulfric's never a POV character, and as such, he doesn't get much page time. He's more a minor character in the book. It's all told through his wife, Gwenda's perspective, and Gwenda does not have that excellent character development, or she does have good character development, but she doesn't have the excellent character qualities that Prior Philip had. And the Prior in this book, he's awful. Awful. I mean, he's so frustrating. And the villain of this book, the primary villain of the book, I should say, is Ralph. And Ralph is very much like William Hamley in Pillars of the Earth. So much so that I wonder if he outlined this book and just took out, some things and then put in other things for the characters. Like he used the general outline. But rather than build a cathedral like in the first book, this book is all about building a bridge that collapses. It's about building hospitals during the Black Plague, and it's about building a new palace for the Prior. I told you the Prior wasn't good. And building a few other things in the town. And you follow a builder named Murthan, who basically is going through life to become a really good builder, and he shares a lot of both Tom Builder's personality traits and a lot of Jack Builder's personality traits. He really is a lot like both of them, and so it's just really interesting that the book follows such a similar path there. The biggest departure is Godwin. He's so different from his counterpart, Philip, and that's what really sets the book apart in some ways. And Philemon, Philemon was just so frustrating because he could have been so great, and then he wasn't. But as I said, there's a writing style here that just enraptures you into the story, and you just have to keep reading, and you care about all the characters, even the ones that you hate. You have to care about them, and you have to read about them, and it's so intense and interesting, and I just love that. I love that in the book. There's a reason I was able to read it in 3 days. It's not because it's short. No, it's an incredibly long book, one of the longest books I've ever read. but because I was so invested. You know, there's other books I've enjoyed that are 1,000 pages long, but it's taken me longer to read them. It usually takes me about a week to read a 1,000-page book because either life gets in the way or I just don't feel like I have to keep reading. This was an example of I would give up everything else, my TV watching, my movie watching, my, doing other things just so I could read this book. And that was kind of, some of it was conscious, but some of it was subconscious. And so it shows just how enrapturing the book is. And I would say the strongest part of this book is the middle portion, probably from about page 400-ish all the way to page 850-ish. That is an incredibly strong contender for Book of the Year, that portion of the book. And if he had split this book up, if he had written this book in itself as a trilogy and made it like 300 pages, 350 pages each, like a standard trilogy might be, that middle part could have been, one of my favorite books ever. However, the beginning and the end of this book are what makes it so frustrating to me. And I have to talk about this because it is such an integral part of the way I read books and such an integral reason why I am so frustrated with this book, and that is the way that Follett writes sex. It is, and I'm sorry if anyone feels like I'm going on a soapbox here, but I have to talk about it for a little bit. He includes so much sex and sexual elements in his books. It is ridiculous and annoying. Now, he did the same thing in Pillars of the Earth as well, and I complained about it in my review there, but it's also here, and there's reason for why he puts it in. I get it, but he makes it so explicit, and he makes it so long and arduous and so focused in the book that every single character except one is basically this morally depraved, doing all these bad things type character. It is just so frustrating that Follett is not able to write these situations without getting gratuitous. It is, I will flat out say, it is gratuitous in this book. And you could write the characters having these things happen to them without dwelling on it. Without describing every intricate detail. And it's so frustrating because as someone who believes that we should not be, looking at these things that'll cost us to lust, it's very frustrating when you're reading those portions of books and you can't really skip them because then you will be missing some of the important information that he includes. So it's just frustrating. It's kind of like the way Martin does Game of Thrones, but to be honest, I think Martin is just a little bit more prudish than Follett is. I think Follett's way more explicit than Martin, which is just so funny to me. Me calling George Martin a prude, that's funny. Anyway, but yeah, Follett is ridiculously explicit. And again, it's really only in the beginning and the end. And for like 450 pages in the middle, that stuff, it's either not present or it's not explicit, basically. I had so many hundreds of pages where I'm like, wow, I'm really surprised. I'm loving the book. It's so clean. It's so good. Yes. I was like, had he had like a magical thing happen and he just decided not to include that stuff? And then at the end of the book, he included it again. And I was like, come on. So maybe this is in all his books, including his thrillers. I don't know. But it was just frustrating that it was so present in this book. And also, to stay on my soapbox for just another moment, I complained a lot about this in my previous review. But again, I said the similarities are that my praises for the first book are the same and my criticisms of the first book are the same. In both books, Follett demonstrates a complete misunderstanding of Christianity and its tenets. And I'll give one example, just one, where one of the characters, who is, a well-educated character, so he knows some of the tenets of Christianity. I'll say who it is. It's Ralph. Ralph, even though he's a despicable, disgusting character, he said, he's about to commit an egregious act, an egregious, sinful, horrible act, and yet he says, right before it happens, and the person is pleading for him not to do this act, he says, oh, don't worry about it. God will just forgive me, so it's not a problem. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of Christianity, that we do not sin because we do not actively sin because we know that God will forgive us. God has forgiven us. Therefore, we make every stride to do the right thing. We can never be perfect, but we understand as Christians that our goal is to try to do the right thing. And this character actively knows what the wrong thing is and what the right thing is and chooses to do the wrong thing under the auspices of, well, God will just forgive me if I just go and confess my sins before a confessor or a priest. And it's not about that. It's about the true Christian heart is about the desire to have a relationship with God and a desire to do the right thing. And so it's kind of like that discussion of you don't do good works, you don't do good works so that you can be saved. You do good works because you are saved. It's that type of thing. You don't sin because you know you have a get out of jail free card. You actively avoid sinning because you do not want to be associated with that. And so it's so frustrating. And that's just one out of many examples. There were other characters. Gwenda would be one. Karis would be another. Although Karis demonstrates the best heart of any character in this book, but even Karis, I have major problems with her worldview. And then Godwin specifically, Godwin's so frustrating, and Philemon, and so many other characters in this book, they just don't get, and it's because the author just does not understand Christianity and its precepts. And maybe it's because he was burned as a kid with some connection to some Christians or something, but I really wish Follett would try more to understand Christianity, and instead he writes in such a harsh light. Anyway, I have gone on way too long about that. So let's talk about some positives. Again, the Black Plague is in this book. It was dealt with beautifully. The 100 Years' War was also handled very well. The focus of these books is good when it's on the people of Kingsbridge, because that's what this series is about. Everyone says, oh, Pillars of the Earth is just about building a cathedral. Well, yeah, but it's about the characters. Same here. You're building all these buildings and stuff, and all these events are happening, but it's about the characters and the people of Kingsbridge. And so you see the war a little bit, but through the eyes of the people of Kingsbridge, through their sons being sent off to war, through some of the nuns being sent to the king to deal with some dispute with the king, and so they go and experience a battle, and they see the horrors of war and all this stuff. And that, I thought, was all done brilliantly. Again, that was the middle portion of the book. And then, of course, building the bridge. I was so invested in how Murthan was going to build the bridge, and building the hospital, and how Karis was going to move power away from Godwin and Philemon and towards herself, I thought was brilliant. I thought that was great. I thought it was fantastic. And so there is so much excellent story and excellent writing that just made me keep going. Yet at the same time, my two biggest problems about the way he writes Christianity and the way he writes sex are just so pervasive in these books. So I will yet again say what I did with the first one. I will give this one about a 9.3. I gave the first one like a 9.5. I'll give this one a 9.3. It is an excellently crafted book. However, I say that with those caveats that those problems I have are pretty significant problems, but because I was so invested in the book, I'm going to give it more of a high rating. If I wasn't so invested in this book, boy, would the rating have plummeted. And that's the thing that's keeping it from being in the 9 range and not being in like the 6-ish range, is because I was so invested in everything. So that's my review of World Without End, the sequel to Pillars of the Earth, a big, chunky, over 1,000 pages. This one's like 1,015 pages, so it's even longer than Pillars of the Earth. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And do you think that it should have been split up into a trilogy like I think? I think all these books could have, and it would have been better. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.